clinical psychology at Sidra Hospital. And he has also worked at, he got his degree at UCLA in 1999 with a double major, and this is unusual. He got a double major in both psychobiology and Arabic. And he took his Arabic very seriously. Some of you know that when you get a degree in Arabic in American universities, you still come out sounding like Israeli intelligence. But he took it very seriously and went very deep in his Arabic. And so after his undergraduate studies, he traveled to Hadramaut, Yemen, where he studied Arabic and Islamic studies at Dar al-Mustafa. And he completed an MA degree and a PhD degree in clinical psychology at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. Psychology from an Islamic perspective, and serves as a reviewer for various peer-reviewed scientific journals in the fields of substance use, psychology, neuropsychology, and neuroimaging. For those of you who have not met Dr. Omar Mahmood, I would say that he is really, in many ways, a hidden jewel of our community, where he is able to take current developments in neuropsychology and view them from within an Islamic epistemological area. I myself have been amazed when I just asked him a question about an issue that is pressing in psychology that many Muslims ask themselves. I'm surprised at the depth of his answers and how well he's able to draw from classical Islamic sources in looking at some of these issues that confront us. So this is something that I think is a real treat for us to have at this time. And we're very honored to have him also as a consultant for our master's program in counseling psychology that is going to be launching in the fall of 2024. And that having open house on November 22nd. Inshallah, on November 22nd for those who are interested. And as for today's lecture, you know, it is psychological and spiritual in the face of atrocity and tragedy in Palestine. A very timely lecture and something that I think all of us need for use at this time. And thank you for coming to Palestine.
Thank you for the patient and time and presence as we discussed tonight. We are here in the College of Islamic Studies, and it's very interesting because we're talking about psychological techniques, psychological theory. But one of the things I like about being in Qatar is that you can be true to your identity of a Muslim, an academic, be a clinician, and you don't have to separate from any of these identities. So we will start about a question. Happens a lot now. We as a community around the world, we're following clearly and very tightly in terms of the news, the social media. Mic is open, right?
Yeah.
No. That. So we're all being exposed to all kinds of things. Yet some of these images are actually very, very intense. And so many of us will see on the screen, normally on the phone, they'll ask you, do you really want to see this? Do you really want to view this? And then you click on it, and then it'll be, unfortunately, a very sometimes just violent or very sad image that we're getting exposed to every day from Gaza. So I get a lot of questions and comments from Muslims all around the world about what do I do? I'm just overwhelmed from seeing this every day. And every time I look at it, I can't stop. I have to keep looking at my phone and seeing what are the latest updates, what's happening in Gaza. And some feel like, should I not look? Should I look away? Others will say, no, I can't. I must look. I have to, bear witness for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, that I want to be aware of it. I want to be able to spread awareness. I need to make sure I'm educating other intense images or videos. We're talking about it here because I know we've all seen it. We don't need to repeat it here in this venue. But we will talk about some of the psychological and spiritual burdens that many of us are experiencing by looking at what we're seeing in Gaza. So my question to all of you is, how are you coping right now? How are you doing as you're consuming all of this media and all of this news stories? How are you reacting to it yourself? Maybe just as a show of hands, how many of you feel overwhelmed or crying or sadness and you don't know what to do? Okay, happens to everyone. Maybe once a month or once a week, more than twice a week, more than 3 times a week. So it's quite intense that many of us were experiencing this, that one of the things is you feel very helpless. Like, I'm so many thousands of miles away from them and they are, experiencing all of this trauma, all of this tragedy, and I'm here in my comfortable house and my technology, and I have water and electricity and I have AC going and I feel very comfortable. So there's a sense also of guilt, like, they're going through all this, and I have to, not only am I in a better, comfortable state, but I don't have any way to reach out to them or help them, at least not, face to face. And this is a human response. If you feel this in your heart, that's a good thing. I would be very scared if you didn't have these feelings. That would be a sense of what our scholars call qaswat al-qalb, a hardness of your heart. Would you not feel this sadness and despair? Of course you would. And if you're worried that you're getting overwhelmed and you're crying, that's also a sign of your humanity. This is the normal human response when you're exposed to this level of trauma. So what we're talking about is secondary trauma. It's also known as vicarious trauma. When you start exposed to images or other stories of people, what's happening to others. It's not happening to you, but you are feeling a sense. It's a term meaning that you are committed to your religion, your faith. It's the tendency to, want to be engaged with your own religious tradition. So, it's in other words, it's a more active way to say that you're involved in your faith. You may be a person, maybe a Muslim, maybe a Christian, but you're not necessarily engaged with that faith unless you go into the beliefs, the principles, you practice on them, you engage in the rituals, all of the practices and the jurisprudence of your faith. That's considered a more committed way of experiencing your religion. And this is something that we're well aware of, and you can do this publicly with other same faith people, your brothers and sisters in faith. You could do it publicly, like going to the masjid or going to a majlis or something where there's people in a social situation. Or it can be very individual, it could be an individual sort of effort where it's just you alone turning to your Lord, praying, making dhikr, or making supplications. So it has a personal versus a public sphere in which you engage with your faith. The reason I'm discussing this and sort of highlighting it is because religiosity is thought in the research to be a protective factor. It's actually well documented in studies that if you have an engagement with your religion, typically you will have better outcomes, whether you're looking at a patient population, a certain community sample, certain types of people who are at risk, youth who might be at risk. Those that have an engagement to their religion typically will have better outcomes when you turn in terms of their psychological functioning, their well-being, even just medically, how they do well in their treatments. So it's a well-known concept in psychological research, and now it's getting more and more attention to. Even the APA, the American Psychological Association, they have whole efforts engaging faith communities about how do you use your faith when coping with psychological trauma. It's a whole area. Actually, there's the president of APA is going to be releasing out shortly some videos talking about ways in which different faith groups use their faith, their beliefs in psychological coping. So the power of the faith is well documented in the research, in the academic circles, and then of course we witness it every day when you look at the people of Palestine and in general when people who are oppressed, and if they have a spiritual tradition that they can rely on, then they're much more protected. They have a way to cope with this tragedy in front of them. This is one of the screenshots, of a father counseling his son because the other sons were killed in the attack, in one of the attacks, and he's trying to console him and saying that, look, we're blessed. We're in the blessings around us. Using this psychological and spiritual way of looking at the world to help console his son. And this is what many people are being just so impressed around the world, that they're looking at the reaction of people in Gaza, and they're trying to figure out what is the faith that these people go. Like, what is it that they believe in? Because clearly it's helping them in some way. Like, I wouldn't imagine this to be something I could cope with or I could handle, and yet they're handling it. And when you lose a child in particular, it touches a lot of people. A lot of people around the world, they see these images, these videos, and it just touches you, because when you see a dying or a dead child, you immediately start thinking about your own children right away, and it starts to move you, moves your heart, and makes you tearful when you think about, wow, that could have been my family, and here these people are going through it right now. And so, there's a hadith Qudsi where Allah, in this narration, asks his angels, when one of my servants, their son dies, and so he says, قَبَضْتُمْ وَلَدَ عَبْدِي, did you take the soul of my servant's son? And the angels say yes. And then he says, أَقَبَضْتُمْ ثَمَرَةَ فُؤَادِي, did you pluck out the fruit of his heart when the child died? And the angels say yes, we plucked it out. And if you imagine the imagery of that, of like you losing your own child, it says it's like a piece of your heart has been ripped out. And so Allah says, what did my servant say? ماذا قال عبدي? And they said, the angels respond, حمدك واسترجع. They said, they praised you, O Lord. They said, Alhamdulillah to you. And then they said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed, we belong to God and we will return to God. So that type of response is something that we're well, praised in our tradition of having a way to deal, even in the face of something so tragic and disappointing, to lose your own child. But for the Muslim tradition is that this is part of the tribulation itself, and how you would react to that tribulation. The reaction is also demonstrated by the Prophet ﷺ when he lost his son, when Ibrahim, his son, died. It's well-known narration that he said, the eyes send their tears, the heart is saddened, but we do not see anything except which pleases our Lord. Indeed, Ibrahim, we are bereaved by your departure from us. So that the tears is a natural response, that you would cry and you would feel sad. And for many, when you get to that moment of your crying, it's cathartic. It releases some things in your body, some anxiety, some fears, some sadness, frustrations. The tears are healing, actually. So sometimes if you're thinking, why am I crying in these situations? It's probably your body's response in a healing way. The prophetic example is that, when he lost his son, the Prophet, he went through this kind of depressive state in which, he was clearly saddened, and it was narrated that, what does he say? He says, when he picked up Ibrahim, he said, فَقَبْلَهُ وَشَمَّهُ. So he picked up the body and he kissed Ibrahim and was smelling the fragrance of the baby, which is very similar to the images that we're seeing from Gaza. And he started crying. Both of his eyes started filling up with tears, until Abdurrahman bin Auf, he said, وَأَنْتَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ? You as well, Ya Rasulullah, you would react this way in this moment, normalizing the normal emotional response in this type of tragic, sad moment. That it's okay. You can have that moment of tearfulness and sadness. And it's just that he said, we can have these responses, but we just don't say anything that would displease Allah. So that, وَإِنَا بِفِرَاقِكَ يَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ لَمَحْزُونُونَ. And indeed, when you left Ibrahim, we were afflicted with sadness. لَمَحْزُونُونَ is a very interesting part of, in the Arabic language, it's passive, it's مَفْعُولٌ بِهِ. In other words, the sadness came to me when the Prophet ﷺ was experiencing this. I didn't get sad. I wasn't hazeen or hazin or muhzin. Ana mahzoon. It came to me simply because I is in this tragic moment. Sadness will descend upon you, and that's the nature of this world. He said, but we just don't say anything that would displease our Lord. In other words, you have to keep a certain cognitive frame in your mind as well. You can't just lose it entirely, but you have to acknowledge the human response inside. And that is why, actually, these are many examples in Islam, but why you don't conflate iman and your mental health. Those are two separate things. So we are told many times in our community, you know, if you have strong iman, you have strong faith, then you will never have depression. And that's not true. That's actually a false way of thinking at it. Because what happens then is, what happens if you do have a depressing day, or a depressing month, or a whole year, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they had a whole year. So if you have depression for that long, does that mean then you don't have strong iman? Those two concepts we have to separate them. And unfortunately, we do overlap them a lot in our community. So we have to understand that you can have very high levels of faith and religiosity and commitment to your faith. But that doesn't mean you're not immune to depression. So it's a good point to just highlight. In terms of like the strategies, using the Islamic tradition, of course there's a very famous hadith of Jibreel, in which he mentions and we learn about these three concepts in the faith, Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. So you have these 6 pillars of faith, you have the 5 pillars of Islam itself, the deen, and then you have spiritual excellence. Spiritual excellence. So you're at a higher level of spiritual practice. This maps onto like many traditions around the world. You have mind, body, and soul, or spirit, that normally you look at the human being in a holistic way. You don't just simply look at the cognitions of the person, or simply their behaviors, or their the identity of their forefathers. You take it as a whole, and that's, like I said, it's well known in many different cultures. Sometimes it's named differently, but it's usually in this same sort of triad. You have the mind, the body, and the spirit. And you can use those same concepts even in psychological, psychological concepts as well. You just translate it a little bit differently, but you have the cognition, you have the behavior, and you have the spiritual understandings. So, the iman is the sort of the belief system, that's your thought process about your faith. And we discuss and you study things like in aqidah, the theology of your faith. And then in the Islam part that's where we're speaking mostly to behavior and ritual and practices. And that requires jurisprudence. You need fiqh in order to learn that and then practice it in the traditional way. And then for ihsan is this non-tangible part of it, where you worship God as though you can see Him. And if you don't see Him, you know that He's seeing you. And so this part it's not tangible, it's not physical. You can't necessarily, with ihsan, you don't touch your faith, you don't hear it, you don't touch it, it's not a physical thing. But interestingly, you can have a taste. You can have a taste to the faith. So you can map on this concept to many things. For example, if we're talking about, iman, the faith has a taste. There's a certain experiential reality when you're engaged in your faith. But you can move this to in this model. You can use it to pretty much anything in your life. So one example is cooking. This is my son. He likes cooking, so I just took a picture of it, and he likes to prepare these things. If you think about it from the cognition only, you're just talking about the recipes. what are the ingredients, how do I put this together, how do I bake this thing and create, I think these are tacos he was making. But then you can shift then to the practice. How do you actually cook it? How do you put it in the oven, or how much heat do you use? How do you mix things, in what ways? So there's a procedural part of it. And then lastly is the taste. At the end, do you appreciate the taste of it? It's not just simply about calories, it's not simply about recipes, but there's actually something you get out of it experientially, that you taste it. There are people, their relationship with food is just simply about calories, and I want to get a certain amount, count the calories and look at the ingredients, but they don't actually think about the taste. And so this is, in the holistic way, you kind of look at all facets. Now, I'm just going this as an example to show you, but in deeper ways, you would do the same with that image that we talked in the very beginning. What do I do when I see this image? How can I approach this from this holistic way? Starting first from my cognitions, based on my theology and how I intellectually want to interact with this. So you can make a decision about that when you're facing a question. How can I engage with all of these images and videos and news from these tragedies that we're experiencing? Well, one is you start with the intentionality. Why am I doing this? What's the purpose? Am I just consuming it because I'm consuming it? It would be better if you have an actual goal in it, in your mind, and you're focused in that intention. Then you can apply it to the behavior. Okay, I'm not going to repeat it. I want to have a limited way in which I engage with these videos. I want to make sure I'm not just choosing the most violent ones, but I'm trying to use ones that can maybe move the heart and maybe spread awareness. I'm going to probably make a limit. I'm not going to watch the same video over and over and over. Once you see the video, you don't need it, once or twice, but you don't need to watch it 10, 20 times, which unfortunately many of us do. But you have to have a consciousness about it, an awareness of this. And then lastly, what is your niyyah? If you're thinking about it on a higher level, how will this help the people? Maybe will it help me engage in dua? Maybe it will help even just in the, we believe in the metaphysical realities as well. That your prayers and your dhikr and your recitations could have an effect for the people anywhere around who are oppressed. So all of these are ways, when you look at these images, you have to kind of think about it in this triad. When we think about how to react, usually you always have this choice. You may not be aware initially if you're not used to doing that, but if you have a sense of muhasaba, that you look at your own assumptions and your own sort of cognitive lens at which you look at the world, you would realize I do have a choice. So I'm always really shocked when I see patients that I visit in these nursing facilities, or after a rehab, they just had surgery or they just had treatments, and they're in their hospital bed. And there's times when I'll go and I'll meet, a patient just had a stroke, has a lot of functional limitations, can't do their normal day-to-day, activities of daily living. They can't cope. They always need help. They're going to need help with the nursing staff. And then you ask them how they're doing, and they're fine. They have a sense of contentment and peace, And I asked the patient, how are you doing here? How are you doing all this? You can barely move. You can't even use the bathroom without someone helping you. And he said, it's okay. I'm sitting in this bed. I'm pretty safe, and I can eat food. The nurses bring me food 3 times a day. and I have a nephew who comes and visits me once a month, and we have some good times together. So I'm pretty content. And then I'll shift to the next bed and do my clinical intake with the next patient who has the same diagnosis: stroke, post-stroke, surgery, going for recovery, has a number of functional limitations, can't function without help, needs the nurse to help. And I ask this person, how are you doing? And the patient will respond, yeah, this is useless. Look at this life. Look at how wretched I'm living. Can you believe it? They bring me this food. It's that I don't even like. And they bring it. And I have a nephew who comes once a month. That's it. Never comes to see me. And they're complaining about the same thing that the other person is talking about as a positive. And they're realizing these two people have the exact same reality, but they just chose how to look at it. What was the lens by which they decided to interact with the world? And that's a level of awareness that you kind of have to develop. Do you have this awareness and this knowledge of and if you do it, then you can make a choice and you can decide. That's what we call personal one. It's a good opinion about the situation you're in. And two people can apply it, the same situation, and have totally different outcomes simply because of the choice they decided to take. There's a lot of studies about how to make these types of choices, these decision making based on your cognitions. There's this concept of psychological first aid. Many people will take these little trainings. It's meant to help people in traumatic situations so they have an awareness of how to monitor themselves. Just how to be aware, or maybe their family, how to monitor your family, your community, how to pick up if someone is having symptoms of anxiety or depression or PTSD. You have ways, if you have that knowledge, then typically you're in a better state to be able to protect yourself from the consequences of the tribulation that you're facing. It could be a disaster, it could be something tragic, something violent. There are many various ways in which this could be applied. So the question is, how would I react? This is one of the images as well from AP, where this woman in Gaza holding her child. And when you're in a state of such a tribulation, you have a choice of how to react to it. And that's where the faith-based decision making comes. Because if you have a spiritual tradition to rely on, something that you're engaged with, a faith that you feel, you understand the principles, you have an engagement in the behaviors, the rituals and practices, and then you even have a state, this taste in your mind, your mouth about the faith itself. How does it make me feel experientially? Then you can respond to it in a more healthy way. But if you don't have any of those supports, and you don't have a way to process this, like, why is this happening to me? Why is it happening around me? If you don't have a way to express that spiritually, then unfortunately you can go in a negative way and to react, and that won't be healthy for you or your family or your community. So the cognitions are things where if you're being exposed to a lot of these images right now, you have to know your limitations. Okay? You have to know when you need a break. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean you're being, callous or hard-hearted. You can take a break sometimes and just go to your normal, mundane world as a way to disengage sometimes, especially since we're getting overexposed, I think, from a lot of these images and videos. Be aware of your own triggers, and maybe you had past trauma in your own life, things that you remember when you were young, and now you're seeing these images, and it's bringing up certain memories and very sad and tragic things in your own mind. So that's the trigger itself you have to be aware of, and that you might, re-traumatize yourself from something that happened when you were younger, simply because you started looking at the images now, currently. So you have to have an awareness of that as well. And choose what you want to watch. You don't have to, you can still watch the scenes in Gaza without necessarily choosing the most gory videos or the most violent ones. And then avoid the negative thinking. You have to again, that goes back to the personal fun, having a good opinion. And then you can use your own theological understanding as well. The cognitions there can help you to respond, modulate your response when you're faced again with these tribulations. Just asking yourself, would God ever make a mistake? Okay, well, clearly God wouldn't make a mistake. So then that will help me, give me some context to what's happening. Because right now I'm getting panic. I feel like, what's happening? I'm so anxious, and what's happening in the world. And a lot of people say this on their social media, like, what's happening to the world, in this sort of like, panic state. But you can control that if you just think about these cognitions in a more positive way. That your creator, the God, your God, your maker, has a plan, has a divine plan. And so that should relieve you from some of that anxiety that, okay, is everything falling apart? Is the world falling apart? No, there's always this divine plan. The qadr is there. And so you use the theological understandings to strengthen your way of thinking when facing these tragedies. In terms of the behavior part, so that we go for the mind, now we're going to go to the body. In the behavioral part, you have to establish a ritual and routine. You have to have a wird, a certain practice in which you can, again, strengthen your responses. So, monitor your body, because your body will react in certain ways. If you're anxious, you will change things in your body. Your high blood pressure, your ability to breathe, you're feeling tightness in your chest. These are all psychosomatic responses that happen in response to an emotional state. And then you would use the behavioral techniques just from the actual practice of the faith. Could be prayers, could be supplications, fasting. And we know a lot of these things are actually borne out with support and research. Fasting and its ability to affect well-being is well known and documented. Meditative practices like dhikr, recitation of the Quran, this is all under a part of these sort of cognitive and behavioral practices where you use repetitive ways to calm the self down and again modulate the anxiety and the depression. Doing things like charity, helpful things that you can feel like you having a role, that you have some action that you can act upon. So you turn the sadness and anger to something more healthy in your actions. Maybe, for many of us in the States right now, people are going out for protests. And part of it is just to, show solidarity, but I think it's also cathartic as well to find other people who have similar, thoughts and beliefs, and that you can have a sense of community. And one of my brother-in-law was, he was going to one of the big gatherings, the protests in Los Angeles, and it becomes like this big, production, and a lot of people are there, thousands of people are there, they have their flags and they're making their chants, and it's not a bad thing, it could be helpful for the people and for the people in Palestine, indirectly. And I just, cautioned or advised to my brother-in-law, okay, if you're going to go for the protest, that's great, but what would be even more powerful is before you go to that protest, the night before, get up in tahajjud and pray. And you will come to the protest with a totally different, engaged, spiritual and psychological reality that, could be more beneficial. There's also one technique is breathing. There's a lot of research about this. I'm not going to go for every set of these behavioral things. I'm just giving this as an example that the way that in which you can regulate your breathing, especially if you're timing it with your recitations in qira'ah, or if you're doing dhikr in a way in which you're regulating your breathing. There's a lot of evidence about just regulating. Oh, sorry. I don't know when it came on. It just come on?
Yes.
Or was it 30 minutes? So there's a lot of techniques in terms of behavioral ways in which you can support mental health, simply because you're engaging that psychosomatic system in your body. And then, so we go into the mind, the body, and then you get to the spiritual understandings. And these are all by the way, they all get integrated with each other. It's not just separate entities. They're actually, the idea is that there's like an interaction with all of these, and so that you have a more healthy and holistic way to respond. So be aware of the unseen reality. We don't. That's the nice thing about, I would say, in psychology, that they're now acknowledging that not everything has to be physical and empirically defined. You can have spiritual realities that are maybe difficult to define, but they seem to have actual outcomes and positive effect in the outcomes. So that there's spiritual, unphysical realities, and even though you cannot perceive them, you acknowledge that it's there, and that goes back to the same idea of the ihsan. And ta'budullah ka'annaka tarahu. You as if you can see the realities. But if you can't see these things, maybe you don't know how to access the unseen world, the spiritual world, the ghaib, it's okay. You can still acknowledge it. I know that He, Allah, can see me, even though I can't see Him. Maybe He can see me. So again, just enforcing this idea that can be used when you engage with your environment, what you're being faced with. So, as we said in the hadith of Jibreel, where he then defined ihsan, to worship God as though you can see Him, even though you cannot see Him, you know that He sees you. I think one of the ways that for me personally, that it helps me to access the spiritual understandings are things where you can look at verses from, poetry, qasida, anashid, things that you can engage with, in which you're praying. You're praying, basically making supplications, but in a way that engages also your somatic reaction in your body. This is a line from Imam Ali Muhammad al-Habshi, one of the great Hadrami scholars. He says, قَدْ تَمَمَ اللَّهُ مَقَاصِدْنَا وَزَالَ عَنْ جَمِيعِ الْهَمِّ. So indeed, like all of my purposes have been fulfilled. All of my purposes have been fulfilled. And all of my worries and anxieties were removed. If I do believe that there's a God, then I would be relying on that God to help me in these situations. And so that you can have all of your anxiety removed, all of your depression and PTSD removed. At least that's the hope. And of course, you have to constantly call upon your Lord to engage that. But it's just a way to think about, again, what I'm talking about, the ihsan, the spiritual understandings. If you assume the outcome, then you know that it will be better. So this sad moment, it won't be too overwhelming. That's actually, I was FaceTiming with my daughter last night, and I asked her, what would you do if you're faced with something so tragic, but you know that Allah is in control? And that was her response. She said, well, you can assume the outcome, and it'll be better. And I think family discussion with children is very important because we have to help them process the realities that's around, but they also help us because they may have a more fitra way of looking at the world, a naturalistic way of looking at the world. And so one of the suggestions would be to make sure that these topics and these tragedies that we're all being exposed to is something that, as a family, you have some way to discuss. How can we talk about it? Not every person just be alone watching it and then not processing it together as a group. The group process is very important. That's actually a very important step about being able to cope and finding ways to support your own well-being. So again, as we're wrapping it up, the idea of these concepts, is a holistic idea, and that with all of these, the mind, the body, and the spirit, all three of these can share in bearing and carrying the psychological burdens. So that we try to look at things, again, from this holistic way, so that maybe your mind is very strong, but your body and spirit not so much. You need ways to kind of compensate. Ideally, we want to strengthen all phase, every aspect of it. But the idea is that you don't have to just choose only one. You can use, with all three of these things, ways to support your own mental well-being. Resilience is a very interesting concept because we're worried about the people in Gaza, and we're worried about the people in Sudan and everywhere where there's oppression. And what's very interesting is that not everybody who goes through this kind of trauma ends up having PTSD. Actually, most people find the resilience, and they're able to adjust somewhere later in their life. So there's a lot of studies to show that you have disasters that could be physical, like natural disasters, or any other violent, distressing life event that you're experiencing, and would cause some psychological harm. But only a minority of the survivors then develop PTSD. Most people, if they've experienced a war or they've gone through extreme poverty, they'll have a certain percentage of people who will get traumatized, and they will have anxiety disorders and things that make it very difficult for them to function. But that's usually like 10%, 20%. At most, some of the studies have found up to 30%. But the overwhelming majority of people, 70% of the people, will find a way to cope and get resilience out of that situation. So that, to me, also goes back to the idea of the good opinion. That if you have a way to look at things in a positive way, then you will have a better psychological outcome. Ibn Qayyim, he has this statement: the amount of good opinion and hope you have in your Lord, that will be the reliance you have on Him. So can you decide in your mind to have a way in which you look at the world with husnul dhan, with a good opinion about your fate, your reality about me. Like it's not just about punishment or me or people just experiencing sadness. That's not the purpose. There must be something beyond, a wisdom behind it. And if you have that sense of, okay, I know God doesn't make a mistake and he has a divine plan, then it would be a good thing somehow in the end. Maybe not in this physical reality right now, but at some point, if you think about it in a larger reality, we're all coming back to God at some point. We will all be buried in our graves at some point. And so this is the idea to give you that perspective that like you don't have to look at it as a bad thing all the time. The the hadith of make dua to Allah, and while you were convinced it will be answered. Meaning that you have decided in your mind intellectually, I know that he will respond. It may not be in the form necessarily that I'm expecting, but I know that he will respond. And so again, you extract from that a sense of spiritual and psychological strength. As Allah says in a hadith Qudsi, أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ عَبْدِي بِي. I will be according to my servant, whatever their opinion is of me. If you look at the world and you think that God is out to get you and is always trying to make you fail and make other people fail around you, then you will see that in your reality. You will actually manifest that in your life. But if you believe that there is a divine plan and it's in my best interest and that my Lord is always watchfully and has a good plan for me, then you will manifest that in your life. You will see that around you. Even if we see these images and these videos of the brothers and sisters in Palestine, you just see that they have a sense of this idea that they're not going to just say things against God. They're not going to say things that would displease their God. And I truly believe that it's possibly that Allah is raising them to a certain spiritual maqam right now. And it's actually for the rest of us to kind of use this as an example of, all right, what are you doing with your life? What's your way in which you look at the world? What's your cognitive way of looking at the world and deciding how do you engage with whatever struggles and challenges you have in your life? And that's it. After Lincoln, I ask you for your forgiveness, and I'm not sure if it touched on the topics that you maybe wanted, so on that part I'm sorry, but again, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for that excellent talk. That was, alhamdulillah, very useful for all of us in many ways to bring together many strands of those issues that we are confronting, both outwardly in what we see and inwardly in how we deal with it and process this situation. We'd like to open the floor up for questions, and especially given the delicacy of this matter and that this is an opportunity for everybody to benefit from the presence of Dr. Omar, please do confine your remarks to questions that he can answer that will be beneficial for all of us.
But also,
Well, I'm just trying to avoid the statements in the diatribes.
Yeah, I understand. But it's also meant to be a healing moment as well. I mean, we're all kind of going through something and what we're witnessing. So, in other words, you don't have to feel like you have to cut short your own emotions. If you want to express those as well, ahlan wa sahlan.
So, please, yes.
Assalamualaikum, Jazakallah khair for the session. Doctor, I want to ask you, like, you talked about, like, usually we start talking about things which we are hurtful or something. But if we see as a collective, not just as a family, but as a big group of humanity or maybe as Ummah, and this is a problem not of 1 day or 2 days. It is a problem of 70 years maybe, or by now. So do you think this psychological effect or like psychological coping mechanism of our generations, there's some transfer of problems from generation wise, and we have something which we take from our grandfathers or fathers, they have seen some atrocities come up, and now we are prone to it and we are used to it, and we don't even feel like, we feel only when it is extra, and something have become normal. So does that happen? And how
Yeah, yeah, thank you. If I understanding, you're talking about like if you get desensitized, you maybe because of it's something in our it's in our community, it's in our generations, it keeps passing on, you know, that we're exposed to these things. Yeah, I do think like, you know, what can happen generationally is that a community starts to feel like, you know, they're not effective, you know, they're not, they might be lesser, they might have a sense of, you know, their own opinion of their self is kind of low, and might disengage, you know, no longer be very, I guess, intentionally about, you know, being a Muslim. And then sometimes these types of events wake us up, you know, suddenly like we get woken up because it's sad that it has to be something so tragic, but part of it is because, as you mentioned, we do kind of get into this state where it's very well, you know, it just becomes a calm, normal thing, and we don't react, you know, or reactivate that sense of that community and that reaction to our faith and using our faith until something very heavy happens. And I think this has been a moment where it's very, very heavy. And so people are reconnecting almost to the faith. I mean, people that aren't even faith, you know, have a faith at all are becoming interested in faith simply because of this level of you know, calamity that we're seeing. So it's affecting, you know, our community and beyond too.
Yes. Sorry, this lady up in the back. Yes? Is it working?
It's working.
Yeah, there you go, yes.
So thank you, Doctor, for being here. So I have a question. If you are currently in a freeze response, given everything that's happening, and a lot of people around you are more in the flight response, how do you break out of the freeze response, and how do you handle what's happening of the people that are in the flight response? Because these are two different responses to traumas. And I'm currently facing that.
You're in the freezing state?
I'm in the freezing response,
Yeah.
and it is affecting me. It's very overwhelming, and even though I'm in the freezing response, but it's still overwhelming.
No, it is very overwhelming. I mean, you freeze like when you see something so like a bear, right? And it's right in front of you, and you don't know what to respond. And so freezing is one of our evolutionary, you know, reactions that we do as humans. And then that can also happen in our cognition as well. I just can't think. I'm frozen on this. I don't know how to respond. I don't know how to engage. I don't know how to use my actions. Some people, like you said, right away, they go into the fleet, you know, they go into it, they go still fight, they go for, you know, engage in something, they do something, but other people don't. And we have to also acknowledge that we have different personalities. Everybody has kind of like different ways in which you look at the world, and that's okay too. You don't have to, if you see everybody running one way, it doesn't mean that you have to follow that same way too. Maybe your path is different, but equally important. Like you might, so I'll give you an example. There's a family that I know where the sister is very into the activist mode right now. She's going to Palestine protests. She's going into political things. She's trying to engage with the signatures, trying to get people, to promote certain policies, all of these things. Whereas the brother is much more contemplative, just reflecting and not necessarily saying much, but he would prefer to go to they have these teach-ins where you go and you learn about the history of what's happening in Palestine. When did it happen? And what are all the different, political players in it? And having that awareness gives him a sense of like, okay, now I can at least manage it a little bit better. It's a different route than the other, and then you can have the spiritual thing. So he would joke with his sister, okay, you went to the protest today. Did you help the Palestinians when you were protesting? But he's saying this in a way that like, you might have a different way you may have a different response, and that's okay too. I think the other thing to do is just be gradual about it. You don't have to, again, react the same way that other people do, but it's nice if you can have two or three people that you can just have a discussion, have a little debrief together. We just, weekly look about it. We figure out how are we feeling about it? How do we respond to it? So that you have some way to at least release some of that energy, and maybe you might get a sense of safety, and I can talk to someone and I can be a little bit vulnerable, and that's okay as well. So I would say my advice would be to do it in a gradual way instead of just pushing yourself to something very acute.
Yes, this gentleman here. Yes.
When you said about turning feelings into action, that particularly resonated. That was very nice. Something I try to do on a personal level, whether it's not finding my voice, but something I struggle with is in a professional setting. Sometimes you feel like a crazy person, right? When you work with not necessarily this situation in the same way we've been talking about it in this forum. Times often pretending like nothing's going on. How do you deal? I don't know if you've ever had that experience. How do you deal with trying to express that, make turn feelings into action, but in the professional environment? And how you deal with the stares, the weird reactions that something might happen when people, sometimes try and focus a little too hard on staying professional.
Right. That's a great question. And this does happen. A lot of people are reporting this, by the way. Like, I'm so engaged in this topic and this, this tragedy that's happening, and then there's people around who are just having their normal day, and they find that very like uncomfortable and sometimes even frustrating. Why are they so calm or like just engaged in these kind of superficial things is which is a little bit of a judgment, right? But they feel that like I'm experiencing this at such a deep level and it's cutting my own heart, and then other people don't have that reaction. One of the things is that like obviously that's not that's not your responsibility, right? You have to make sure you limit that to yourself and like understand that your job is not to activate these people. Like, that's their choice, and that'll be something that has to be part of their development. But if you have, I think, a chance to kind of educate people in a way that's calm and doing that, you will get some relief because you're actually still on the topic and you're kind of processing it in a way. But you just kind of, with maybe you have to be, again, that goes to the decision making. You have to decide who would be the first person I want to talk with. Someone who's already had a good rapport with me. I've noticed it just on like Facebook. It's people that like I remember from high school. They're just sending me messages. Like, Omar, what's going on? Like, can you tell me what's happening? So that's a good point. That's a point that I will engage with. But I'm not gonna go through like everyone and like post everything on their send messages to them, and it's not really relevant to them yet. but if you do have an opening, I would say go with it in a gently way, and that might be a way that will have a mutual benefit, you know. So, but the other part of like, you know, be merciful to yourself and to your fellow, you know, colleagues and stuff as well. They may be just at a different development stage, and maybe at some point they will get that really, you know, that realization.
Yes, over here. Or you can do that. Go for it.
Um,
The existence of two kinds of space in the Palestine. So either it often tends to be protests or lecture space, religious or academic. But what I don't see, and maybe this happens or healing space. And I think this is a personal drive where going to work and you feel like the present to life, like it's so hard to do that. And then we leave, and as soon as we leave, we have very little to lean on in terms of understanding how to process the experiencing. And though it is secondary trauma, but also the fact that it is a lot of mass trauma. So some of the things you have pointers or guidance on how perhaps curate the space for that leaving. Regardless of whether it's on a small scale or on a much larger scale, especially in as an area where a lot of people here are about family, entirely dependent on friends or neighbors, or feel very isolated, have to be away from people, but also be away from any opportunity to heal.
That's a great point. I think the healing spaces is it's a valuable part of this piece of this you know reality, which is there are now it's more in North America that I'm aware of, where they will have these healing circles or gatherings where people can kind of have almost like a group therapy where you just process it and try to share. I mean, the sister today, you're just now talking about feeling that freezing moment. That's really, I'm so thankful that she shared that, because it's possibly there's other people as well having similar feelings, but they don't know if it's been validated or not until they hear it from someone else. And then if you have a little gathering, it's nice to just have a way to deflate and kind of, in a healthy way, get out some of this energy. We don't want it to be cooped up in a way that's unhealthy, and then it doesn't come out in a positive way. So I think my suggestion would be, yeah, if there's a way, it's difficult in Qatar to find, you know, because there's certain structures and you know, policies and things. So you have to kind of find a way that it's. But I think if you do it through maybe the student groups, you know, if it's on campus, it's a little bit easier to have a sense of like these kind of gatherings and groups. It sounds like you're gonna bring on that. Oh, okay. But yeah, I think the other thing is like so some of the models that I've seen in North America, you know, because they're in places where the Muslims are very, you know, minority, and then they're just trying to huddle a way in which they can kind of have same-minded people to just share with and have experience with. So there are, if you just Google like, you know, Muslim healing circles, there's going to be a number of them in different cities all around you know, America, where they're doing it, and it's basically in the same idea. They don't know who to share with because they're sort of minority, so they gather together.
So is this lady down here, please?
Salam.
My question is about people who can with mental health. There's someone very dear I think, struggling. They are going back to your triangle with the spiritual, like spirit, mind, and body. They're spiritually strong, mentally strong, but they are physically suffering. I can see that. We can see that. But every time we try to engage in a conversation, it turns into politics, and news, instead of actually, because they won't even consider the fact that their physical problems are stemming from experiencing this, because they are so like spiritually and mentally strong. Yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How do you realize that since that's like how you're doing it, and the answer is like, alhamdulillah, you know? But how do you get them to open up to you or like let that out? Because everyone's just consuming on their own and they're not really connecting. If that makes sense. Thank you.
No, that's a great observation, right? Because I think we do have strong, people in our communities who are just letting it, the burden go on top of them. But then at some point, one of those three will start to waver. If you're under that burden, either you'll start losing your mind. You can't. You're distracted. You can't focus. You can't sleep well. Or the body part. Just you're in this, panic state in your body, and psychosomatics. All of those symptoms are coming up. And obviously, for the Muslim, the most dangerous one would be the religious side of it, your iman itself being affected by these realities and realizing, like, do I even believe? And that's a musibah. That's a really difficult part to be in. I think if you're going to engage with someone, I think, again, everybody's personality is different, but if they're kind of defensive, if they're defensive about it, then you have to kind of do it from a different angle. You have to kind of just start with general things like, are you happy right now? Do you feel okay? And if you say, alhamdulillah, okay, but like, how are you feeling? Can you describe it to me? And just be very concrete. Start very simple. You're not even relating into mental health. You're just talking about, how are you actually doing right now? Or how do you feel inside right now? And keep it very concrete initially, and then see if you can, with time, build a little bit of a rapport in it, and then you can get something deeper. But it's difficult because so many people are functioning okay, but you can tell they're stressed, but they're functioning, so we let it slide. So it's a difficult, thing to navigate. Yeah.
The gentleman up in the back.
It's not like during this process, it's been very stressful for me as an individual. I feel shame as a man that I can't do anything, stressed, I can't focus, and we're doing our best that we can. And the only issue that I see bothering me, I started about this a couple of days ago, that all of us as Muslims, we've been acting as victims. We want to heal, we want to cry, we want to do that. We feel bad what's happening to our brothers and sisters in Gaza. But I have a question for you. If let's say hypothetically, inshallah, it will happen as Muslims, we believe that 100%. Let's say the Palestinian resistance, okay, now it was moving and broke the resistance. Now they're taking over cities and they're taking over towns and they're getting close to us. How would you feel? Would you feel as victims and cry out for their death? Or no, would be on a totally different mindset. If you watch a movie, you sit in there and you watch, you just can't wait, you want to get to the edge. You don't know what's going to happen, and you want to wait for the underdog to win. We're in that situation. And I feel, and then when the things that we're doing is happening, people feel relieved and excited. I don't want to say happy, but we're getting to the goal and accomplishment. Every single one of us here is Muslims who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who believe we can win. And when I ask myself, are we? And it doesn't look good. And I just remind myself, gotta be patient. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Professor Richard said today in the lecture, very something very important. The stuff that whatever happens, we should be thankful and trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say alhamdulillah. that we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises us nasr and promises us victory. And the problem is we're acting like victims. I don't want to say the word in English, it's a bad one. But we need to kind of, not act like that. I'm sorry, this is how I feel, and I don't need to disrespect anyone or anything like that. But I know if things were different, the Palestinians we wouldn't have this conversation. We didn't have to support them more to get Jerusalem to the next level and liberate it. Anyway, any comment on the winning? Are we that we're losing, we're victims, but that's not our destiny, that's not what's promised us. We should say alhamdulillah and prepare for victory and think on the other side. Psychologically, we're thinking of that, we're going to change our mindset, we would actually be still, we need healing circles and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's a great point, brother. Thank you for sharing that. I think, in an ideal sense, if you're really relying on your theology and you're using your spiritual techniques to kind of interact with this world, this temporary, fleeting world, in which it's filled with tests and challenges, then in one sense you always have a sense of like, Allah is in control, and I don't need to be anxious or sad about anything, whether for something good or for bad. Like, it's all good for me, in the sense that that this is what it is to be a believer, right? That like everything is good. That when you look at whatever's happening, I think we have to be aware. We have to be aware of like our own emotions and the base ability, the part of being a human, that we have to try to elevate beyond that, because I do wonder about that. What happens if eventually, and I do believe that, the Nusra will come, but what will be our response? Will we be prophetic in our response? Right now, I think the people of Gaza are showing us that prophetic, example of how to cope with these kind of challenges, in the most noble way. They're not, I mean, there's times when they're obviously overwhelmed with their emotions, of course, and they're going to be yelling and some at points too, and it's very dramatic at times too. But if you look in general, I feel there's a sense of calmness, in their way of responding, and being thankful even in that state, saying Alhamdulillah. And then the ideal would be, if the victory comes, then we should take the example of, Salah ad-Din and how he responded, and how the Prophet ﷺ, Yawm al-Fath, in which we're not here for purposes of revenge and to just burn the world and show like our ignorance towards others. That's not our tradition. So we would hope that we can enable that part of our once it swings, because everything swings like that. Human history is like that. It's ups and downs. But like right now, we're kind of in this low point. But we're not necessarily. It doesn't mean you're a victim. It just means that you're aware of the humanity. That sometimes it is sad and depressing to see these things and to watch our ummah go through these tragedies. But in a longer way, when you zoom out, we know that Allah is in control, and we're all going to the same end, which is back to Allah. It may be in a grave, it may be in a underwater somewhere, it might be on the battlefield, it might just be, but at some point.
You feel that you're losing, feel like a victim versus winning and getting what you want. Things are different. Like things were progressing and winning. would our mind be different? That's what I'm asking. Would we be asking for the healing, or would we say we'd have a totally different type of lecture? The mindset of the I don't win, I lose it. We're always gonna be. I just want to move that mindset to that. That's we're not getting. That's the whole point.
Sorry,
In
sorry.
the most difficult times, Rasulullah gave good tidings about the bright future waiting for Muslims.
Right, right.
And they were like taking the Khandak, for instance. He said, I see the palaces of the Isra, palace of the Byzantine king. So he was giving them good tidings. And also in Surah Al-Isra, for instance, he talks about the rise of the power of the Yahud, and then says, gives the good tidings, not the victory, and they will defeat it at the end. So I think this is the point that he's trying to make, that now you may be in a difficult situation, but in the future, there will come victory after this. So thinking that may also help you to cope with the present situation.
Yeah, no, great point, Dr. Rajab. I mean, I think, yeah, so I don't know, the point of like what we will be, I don't know how to predict that. I just hope that we would have a consistent way in which we look at the world. Husn al-dhan, whether you're in the losing category or you're in the winning. Because even the Prophet ﷺ, when he entered Yawm al-Fath, his head was down in humility. So even in the winning side, there's usually challenges there too, and making sure that you're upholding a certain responsibility. But I think the ideal is to have a consistent way in which you look at whether you're on the losing or the winning. And in fact, for the Muslim, they're the same in the most like zoomed out way. If you zoom in, it's different. If it's very specific time and place, it's different. But if you zoom out across the cosmos, then it's the same.
Yes.
I have a question without going into politics and history. So when I see, so we used to be the caretakers of this region, in Palestine, and Muslims, and there was peace, there was justice for centuries. But when I see, for example, the response of Muslims on the governmental level, the state level, we are unable to defend them. We are even unable to deliver basic aid to our people. And that creates extreme level of helplessness, politically, I feel very, very weak. And yes, we can, pray, we can, we can't even donate to any trustworthy organization. So what I see is that when I compare the current situation of helplessness with our own history, I'm bound to, like somewhere along the line, we must have messed up, in our history, which led to this current situation of helplessness. And that leads me to feel this overwhelming guilt, for what my ancestors probably did or messed up. And so my question is this kind of guilt justified, and how do we process it?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I think we know that in our tradition and in the history is that we become that we're not responsible for our forefathers and what happened there. Like that type of guilt, I don't think is placed correctly. But if it's about your own personal, engagement, like what could I do? And maybe I'm limited on what I can do. But we do understand that it's not just simply the physical realities, of course, right? That, I think many of our scholars would say that like if we would rectify ourselves, then this wouldn't have happened, but it's us as an ummah. Yes, there's a failing in that sense. There's a weakness that, and the Prophet ﷺ, described all this to us already, that there'll be a day when you'll have many in numbers, but you're like the foam that just floats on the top of the suyul, on the floods. And, we're consumed with material world, and we're scared about our end, about death. And so I think, I don't think we should have that kind of guilt. I think sometimes as when you talk about, people, when you get to a sense of arrogance, then Allah will sometimes debase people, as a lesson for, a person, but also for a community or a whole, ummah. That if we probably came to a point where we're too comfortable and a little bit angry, arrogant, and then, okay, so now we're down in a different, wave of this. But again, God is also he will abase people, but he will also elevate people. And that we also believe that, and this should be a sense, these types of beliefs in the divine qualities is part of, like, again, psychological well-being. Like, it helps you to understand this world, that there's realities around. He is yuhyi and mumit. He'll give life and give death. And neither one doesn't mean a judgment on us, like an opinion towards him in that way. It's just, this is the reality. So I think, but it's, I'm so thankful to all of these responses and reflections, because it's part of it is just, we're not going to solve this, right now. Like, how do we get, Palestine free, or just in general, how do we rectify the ummah? But we do need to, like, have honest discussion, and we do need to access these feelings. So that part, I'm really thankful for all this.
Can I just add something to what you're saying? Because a lot of people are talking about, the difficulties in seeing things and feeling, as you were saying, abased, dhillah. There's a beautiful hikam by Ibn Atala al-Iskandari, which says, ما طلب لك شيء مثل الاضطرار ولا أسرع بالمواهب مثل ذلة والافتقار. That is, nothing pleads for you more like being in a state of utter distress, and nothing is faster in bringing divine gifts than abasement and dire need. And so you realize that dire need. And if you look in our tradition, the famous, Inna Rabbi la sami'u du'a of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says this right after reflecting upon how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him children in his old age. And these are the children from which our entire tradition comes forth. And he said that I was in a state of dire need, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overcame that through my dua. And you look at Surah Maryam, it's amazing. You have in Surah Maryam, it says, ذِكْرُ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّكَ عَبْدَهُ زَكَرِيَّا. And Zakaria calls, and he says, my hair is white, I am of old age, my wife is barren. I'm asking you for, and it says, nida and khafiyya. It's a quiet supplication, but some say it's an inner supplication, meaning that actually, even Ajiba says that it's an inner supplication, meaning that it's a supplication from qalb naqiyya, from a pure heart, in a state of true need. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him Yahya, alayhi salam. But then later on, a few lines later, you have Sayyidina Maryam saying, Ya laytani mittu qabla hadha wa kuntu mansan mansiya. So, oh, that I had died before this and were an utterly forgotten thing. Parallel here, that in the state of Zakaria, he's calling out when, in a sense, the receptive element, his wife is barren, is not present. In the state of Maryam, she's calling out when, in a sense, that active element, no man has come forth and brought a child to her. And in both situations, so you look at the two together, it's saying that whichever element it is that you do not have, if you call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that state of ibtirar and iftiqar, that state of being downtrodden and of having dire need, that whatever it is in which you're of need, be it the active element or the passive element, whatever it is in between, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who will come through and bring that to you. And one of the things that we are seeing is many people turning with a state of dua. Many people doing tahajjud that haven't done tahajjud in years. People going back and reading the Quran. The mosques are as full as they are during Ramadan on Yom al-Jum'ah. So this is, people are turning to this. People are seeing within this. People are realizing their need. And through that, this is what the Quran shows us over and over again. It's through that. It's through realizing that dire need, just not making dua, but through truly realizing that dire need, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and that indeed responds to us. So, astaghfirullah for interjecting.
Jazakallah khair.
Yes, this lady up here and then that lady over there.
Just thank you for the nice presentation, Dr. Omar, and thank you for bringing this topic. As a Palestinian mom lady here, I can relate to the collective result, as the sister said up and she mentioned the whole guilt issues. As we collectively feel guilty, but also keep in mind, and I advise all of us that in the context of our Islam, there is it's a structure that we all know that each one, an individual of us, we are guarding a gate. And what was called thagr, like every one of us holding and protecting a thagr. And in the collective level, yes, feel guilty, but validate your feeling because it's coming from a reality and it's a valid guilt. But still, also take responsibility and redirect that guilt into empowering yourself by, okay, what can I do to myself? To start with ourselves, because if every one of us worked into empowering themselves in terms of educating ourselves about what's going on and acknowledging our own limitation as individual and relying, Allah has his aqdar, what we call his aqdar, his destiny. We cannot change it, we cannot interfere in it, but as long we work into our own cause, we take the cause, we work on ourselves, we educate our own children about what's going on. We, as the brother said, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we are the only one that we need to pray and Allah waiting only for our dua. If each one of us think, okay, Allah yuhib al-abd al-mahub. Allah wants, He loves the servant that He keep pushing. If every one of us would just go that route and protect their own gate by taking care of themselves, their families, Allah is there. Like Allah take, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ya'khud bil asbab, how we say it, Allah take with causes, and nothing is gonna come up with a golden thread. We have individually to work and collectively to work. Feeling guilty, yes, we feeling guilty. Feeling freezing, yes, we feeling freeze because we cannot do. Helplessness, as Dr. Omar said, guilt. We sometimes even we fear the, like the empathy fatigue as well. We feel, okay, oh my God, every day I'm going to open the TV and listen to the same over and over news. But, like there is some extent to our ability and things that we cannot control. And as also to keep in mind, the moment everything is here from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we just have this concept, inshallah that would give us the power to cope in a daily basis in the current situation and be able to carry on for the coming generation, because the trauma, the transgenerational trauma that the Palestinian going it's 75 years, but we don't know what's going to be there. It's in Allah's hand, but at least we do our part. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Thank you. Manal is one of our, I was privileged to be a part of her team. We were in at Sidra. She's a therapist right now at Sidra. And so I really appreciate that input.
And so we're going to have refreshments after this, but we've got one last question. Then any other questions, Dr. Omar will be out with us. We'll have refreshments out there. We can continue the conversation. So please, for the lady up here with the blue hijab. Yes.
On what you have told us, one of the things is looking with a different kind of lens, as some of us had mentioned, and what you mentioned, that this sudden major thing that happened had changed a lot of the people, the Muslims, especially maybe non-Palestinian who are not much aware or they don't read a lot maybe about the Palestinian history and what happened, and for all of a sudden, they started to read more, they started to educate their kids. So to look at it in a more positive way, I know it is hard, but to think about it, maybe we needed this stage, we do need this stage for us to change as an ummah, as an Islamic ummah, and so on. So this is one thing, I think, way to look at things positively in a way. And then the other thing is how the guilt feeling, this is something I also, all of us probably are suffering. What can I do? I feel my hands are tied. And should I just post things in the social media? Instead, I noticed that for me, and they help other people also to apply that, to try to educate themselves in the way that is closer to their specialty. For example, if I'm a physician, I will start to post things related to the number of times that Israel, for example, had attacked ambulances, not only since October, since the past 70 years. And you will be amazing about the number of papers that are written for that, and the number of papers from lots of people and scholars from different nationalities, different religions, and you can read about all of that and go ahead and educate yourself and educate others and post it in your Instagram. If you are someone who's studying economy, go ahead and read more about what happened to the economy in the world after this war, to Israel's economy, to the Arab economy. How does, for the 70 years that passed, how does the economy get affected with all of the wars and with the occupation and with all that happened? If you are someone who's a lawyer, and we can go on with the examples. I think this will feel that you are contributing, and especially when it is in your area of specialty as well. But these are my comments and thanks again.
Thank you, Dr. Asha.
Alhamdulillah. So we should go out for refreshments unless you want to take more questions. But I was just thinking if people want to talk, they can ask you questions while we're having refreshments, inshallah. All right, inshallah. All right, thank you all for your questions and for this excellent input. My sincere apologies. Our sincere apologies to everyone whose questions we did not get, and we hope that we'll have an opportunity to continue the discussion with you, inshallah. Thank you very much, Dr. Omar.
Thinking about it, yeah.